Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the initial few stages of setting everything up. The session is now being recorded and we can get started. In case anyone else will be joining us, then they can join us while we're in the session. In case there are any questions, feel free to just pop it in the chat or raise your hand to try and get my attention. Otherwise, you can just turn on your microphone, stop me to ask. Today's session is a CPD training for learning technology, looking at interpreting Turnitin Similarity reports. If you wouldn't mind, could you please all join the link at the top? Let me just put it in the chat. There we go. So when you go to the link, you'll probably see, you'll see something like this. Just select skip for now, and then you will see this. Otherwise, it may ask you to provide a name. As you see, I've provided just my first name to the top right. Do the same. And then once you're here, select the box that's relevant to you. Hi, Laden. In case you missed what I just said, I'm putting this link again in the chat. If you could please join the link and you'll be redirected to Pull Everywhere. If it asks you to register, skip for now. Provide just your first name, that should be enough. And then of the three boxes you will see, as seen here on the slides, select the one that's relevant to you. In case any of you are having any technical difficulties accessing the links, please do let me know and I will look into it for you. But I can see all 9 of you have responded, which is good. Just have the link available because there'll be 2 more activities, including this one, and there will be one after at the end of the session. This is to confirm a school with which you're a part of. If you are one of the professional services and not a lecturer, say a subject librarian, for instance, then select the school that you support. All right, 7, 8, 9 of you. Excellent. So it looks like most of you here today are from nursing and midwifery and healthcare. That's great. Then lastly, it's just to put some comments on what it is that you expect to learn from today's session. I believe the way I set it up allows you to type as many responses as possible. But if that's not the case, then let me know and I can try and make a change. Otherwise, 1 or 2 responses would be more than enough. Is there anything specific you wish to learn, or would it be that you just want to learn everything from the session and there's nothing specific? Just let me know. In most cases, if there is something that you share on this that I haven't included in the presentation, then I can remember to include that while we're presenting, and I would make the necessary changes for the next presentation. But if it's something that it's already included, then it would be good to know. And that way we can just make any additional changes in future as needed. Yes, so most of you are looking for similarity reports, which is exactly what we'll be looking at today. There'll be a few more things on there, like just looking at how to create a Turnitin assignment, and just a bit touching on adding a rubric. And that is just an additional thing that I want to put in there because there have been several questions from staff asking how they can do that. So I'll just show you some of that and provide you guidance from the Teaching Hub, where you can download template rubrics and find relevant links to show you how you can attach the said rubric to your assignment. But other than that, the majority of what we'll be looking at today will be the Turnitin Similarity reports. Excellent. So in this session, we'll be looking at what Turnitin is and how it works. We'll be looking at what we mean by academic misconduct, and by we, I mean the University of West London. We'll discuss any limitations that Turnitin has, and that's from the perspective of what it can and cannot do. We'll look at how we can interpret a Turnitin Similarity report, and I'll also be providing you some information as to the cases when a submission may not be accepted, or in some other cases where it may be accepted, but you may find a problem, for example. And then, of course, we'll see what advice that you would need to give to your students. So what is Turnitin, and basically how does it work? The way we use Turnitin at UWL is that it's an integrated assessment tool within Blackboard. So we don't access Turnitin directly from their website, though you can do that if you so wish. From Blackboard, you would normally create an assignment and make that available to a student, with which the assignment would be used to accept submissions. And if the submissions are of the correct format, and the format, I mean the type of file, that may be a Word document, a PDF, a PowerPoint, and so on and so forth. And of course, the correct contents in the file. If both are correct, then it would normally generate a similarity report if you set the assignment to do so. That way, using the similarity report, you are able to check whether the student may have conducted any misconduct or have plagiarized their material, and that way you can mark them accordingly. So the way it works is fairly straightforward, and I'm sure all of you on here have done in one way or form, created a Turnitin assignment, have marked and so on and so forth. So this is just a quick recap. That is, you can create an assignment within Turnitin. You can create it anywhere, but using the module template that we call the Blackboard baseline template, we normally create this within the assessments area of the module. So when you create your assignment on there, you set any and all of the required and optional settings. We will see this in a moment, but mainly the required settings would be the name of the assignment, the value that you'll be marking it against, usually 100. You would set the start dates, which would usually set by default the date and time when you initiated the assignment, when you started to create it. But of course, you can change that to something later. But one thing to note is that the start date determines when the student can see the assignment and when they can access it to start their submission. So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, with the other required settings would be the due date, when they have to have submitted the assignment by, and of course the post date, which is when the results would be released. And that's also an important setting that we can discuss later, but mainly it controls with one of the optional settings whether the grade would be revealed to the student before the due date. And obviously that's not recommended, and I will discuss why. And then of course you have the option to set whether you want Turnitin to accept for that assignment any submissions that it can check similarity for, or any other file type. Now this here is a very clear distinction. The files that it can check similarity are very specific, types of which I will show you, but the most basic ones are the ones we use regularly. Those would be your Word document, your PDF, your Excel file sometimes, a PowerPoint file, a Notepad file, and more. And then those that it can accept as other file types but doesn't check similarity would be something like what's this called? A zipped file. So it's a folder in which it has multiple files inside. So in that file type cannot check similarity, but it can be accepted if you set the assignment to accept any file type. With the optional settings, these would mainly be your descriptions, whether you want students to see their similarity reports, whether you want to exclude and or include any external any small sources, bibliography and such. We will see this in a moment. Attaching rubrics and or grading forms for when you want to mark, and more. You will then instruct your students when the assignment is created and available to access the assignment and submit between the start date and the due date. With one of the optional settings, you can set the assignment to accept submissions after the due date, so you don't have to create a new assignment later. The good thing with this is that you don't have to replicate yourself to create a new assignment, but also it will clearly mark any of the assignments that have been submitted after the due date as late. That way, you can mark those students accordingly, which is usually marking them down in case they have no valid reason. For when you want to access the submissions, you obviously go to the module itself, then the course management area, course tools, and Turnitin assignments. We will see that. When you're in that section, you will select the assignment that you have. In most cases, you may have more than one, but sometimes it's just the one, then you'd select that, which would redirect you to the Turnitin's assignment inbox. And that's where you see a table with a full list of the student names, the submissions they made. If you set similarity, then you will see the similarity score generated, so you can view the report, and of course, additional information. Selecting one of the assignments would open up a feedback studio that you would use to view and or grade the paper. And paper here is referred to as the submission by the student. And then, of course, when you're marking, you would be reviewing the similarity report, which we'll be looking at, so you can identify whether or not the student may have performed any misconduct, and that way you can mark them accordingly. So what it is that we refer to as academic misconduct. There are a few things here. The first of which is that if the work has been plagiarized. In most cases, you may find a student or a group of students have worked together, and sometimes they may copy from each other within their content. And you'd find that there's that good similarity where a good paragraph or a good chunk of their content is the same across different submissions of different students. Then that way they plagiarize the work. That's misconduct. In some cases, students may collude with each other. Maybe like other than just doing normal group discussions, they may just decide to copy from one another or do something else that is not part of what we accept as far as the submissions are concerned of their assessments. In some cases, they may submit a piece of work either wholly or partly from a previous submission, and usually if they haven't referenced it. For example, you may find a student has done a certain course or a similar module at a different institution. They created an assignment there that is similar to what you've given them now, and they try to use the same content to submit for that paper that you have created. If they don't obviously reference themselves, then obviously they're doing misconduct because it's part of an available source elsewhere of which they have to reference to show where they found that material. In most cases, it may be that they're paying for work, and that would be the companies out there that would charge a few £100, while a student could just provide the assessment brief and the company would create a content for them for which they can submit. Yes, Thomas.
Yes, now going through that list, do our students have like a test, or I mean, I assume they're told at some stage about academic misconduct, and at one of my previous institutions, we actually gave them a quiz, which would be equivalent to a Blackboard quiz, to check that they had been through this, and that in the case that we would have to chase them up on academic misconduct, we could refer them back to that test, because they would have, that would show that they're aware of what counts as academic misconduct. So basically, at what stage, and how are they informed about the university rules of academic misconduct?
From when I started back in 2016, Unfortunately, this wasn't there, so we were not informed, at least not at the time anyway. But recently, I've seen that they've been informing them the first few weeks before they start their modules, and also sometimes during their inductions, like what happened since I believe last year, early last year. So during the induction, we would talk to them about, I don't know, the blackboard, the rules of the university and such. And it would also bring in either a course leader and or subject librarian to talk to them about academic misconduct, creating a good assignment, where to find content, guidance and support, and more. However, there's also additional support offered by the school subject librarians, where yourselves as staff, you can contact them to request that your subject librarian come and speak to the students. Usually it's recommended maybe a week or two before they're due to begin the assignment. That way, they would know what it is they're expected to do. They would know that they have the relevant support from the subject librarian, and of course, they would be shown where to find the materials, where to find the content, how to do the referencing, and what sources to use when they're doing their work. So that way, they will have all the necessary information to ensure that they do not do any academic misconduct.
Thank you. I think it might be worth considering for the university, but I don't know who to speak to actually have a quiz, because it can have quite, if you take the most severe consequences of academic misconduct, you need to make sure that they understand exactly what they are getting into and what can be the consequences. Anyway, thank you for your answer.
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. You're
uh,
welcome. Yes,
hi, Mauricio. Can I pitch in?
yes, absolutely.
Hi. So, like I'm the course leader for BSc Public Health, and we go through the academic regulations in quite detail to our cohorts. We explained academic misconduct. I think I explained like 3 weeks ago. I went to every cohort and explained what academic misconduct is and referred to the academic regulations, which are out already on the website. And I think it's page 95 or 97, something like that, where academic misconducts are quite detailed, written what constitutes academic misconduct. So we just, in our course, we just take the excerpts from the academic regulations and then do a PowerPoint presentation to the entire cohort at every level and say this is what would and if they need further information, they can actually go to the website and direct them to the website and say they can read in much more detail if they want to understand that. So I don't know if other courses do the same way, but that's what we do in our course.
Absolutely. In fact, that's very useful because then I can go and find that information and add it in the slides for previous or for next presentations to ensure that they're all aware. But at least the bare minimum, from what I said earlier, would be to ensure that yourself, as the instructor to your students, you would inform them, as a colleague here has just mentioned, and also just use the services available, like the subject librarians. That's what they're there for. Not only do they just prepare the reading lists for your modules, but they're also there to support students, to provide them any necessary training for when they're doing their assignments, like how to find books or journals or access the reputable sources online and or on campus to be able to create their material for their assignment. And of course, they would also show them how to reference and cite their content. So all of this would make sure that as long as the student is aware of this information, then when they're doing their content, they would be less likely to do any academic misconduct. All right, so moving on, it may be that a student may have stolen someone else's work for whatever reason, and submitting that, then again, academic misconduct. Or of course, just copying from each other. In most cases, it may not always be the case that when you're marking,
Sorry,
you'd find.
can I quickly ask a question, please, based on the
Yeah.
previous slide? Yes. Briefly, what you did is students are submitting. I'm from the computer science. Students are submitting their project proposal this semester in preparation for their actual project next semester. All right.
Mhm.
So One of the things that I told them was that when you are able to do your um, proposal very well, you can include it in the actual project. And then the issue of plagiarism came up because, for instance, they are supposed to present about 150 pages, and it includes their introduction, background, problem statement, aims, objectives, and some of the literature review. So I told them that, listen, if you do it very well, you can take it into your actual project. I hope I'm right based on what we have just said, because I don't want it to appear as if I've told them that something wrong in terms of them doing self plagiarism. What do you think?
Yes, in fact, it's the same thing that I went through when I was doing my project back in 2018-19.
Mm,
The literature review is counted as part of the project itself because it's just a portion of it.
yeah.
The comment we are talking about
Mhm.
using their own piece of work, this
Yeah.
may be like, let's say I submitted something for a module in which
Mm,
I talked about creating an application, for example.
mhm.
And then for my project, I'm talking about creating an application, but I'm going in more detail. Now, if I
Yeah.
use the previous work from the other assignment and I have
Mm,
not referenced it or shown where it's from,
mhm.
then that becomes something. But if it's for the same module, in this case the project, where usually the literature review that they do for the first part can
Mhm.
feed in and be used for the final project itself for the next
Mhm.
semester,
Mm.
then that's fine.
All right. Brilliant. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Yes, Thomas.
Yeah, just also to say, I mean, it might well be that it will show up in the similarity report. So you just need to maybe make the students aware, and that you know, it will be you in the end who sees the similarity report. So
Yeah.
it might be, I don't know, it will certainly come up in the similarity report. But it's I know, I do the same for my, because
Mm.
in our math stats, on
Mhm.
level 6 they have a 1 year
Yeah.
project, and to
Yeah.
get them to do something, we ask them to submit a literature review. But
Of course.
that's typically the first part of the work, right, which they
Yeah.
will include in the final part as well. But I think Miso's explanation was very clear as well. So
All right.
Excellent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers.
All right. So, like I said, it may always be the case, or it may not always be the case that something has been done by the student, and maybe it may constitute something about academic misconduct. But because you're engaging with the students and you know them well, you know their abilities, you know how well they work and such, it would be good to use your own judgment to tell whether or not the student may have done the academic misconduct. If you see a student who has been struggling across the semester and then suddenly they submit an assignment that's very excellent, that would be a red flag. It may be that there's something there that has been done. So that way you can investigate that further. But in other cases, if you see that they started struggling and they're actually building up to do more and more and more and they're getting better, if they then submit something good at the end of the day, then that shows obviously the base progress they did before would not have constituted to them have done anything bad. So it's always good to include your own judgment. Whatever you would normally see from the similarity report, which examples we'll see in a moment, it's usually there just to provide you a bit more information and to support you, but the final decision would come from you. And in most cases, in case you need additional support, it's always recommended that you request for another opinion from a colleague. All right, point 3, looking at limitations, what Turnitin can and cannot do. When you create an assignment and you set it to accept submissions that it can check similarity for, it would usually look, and it would always look, for a document that's submitted in the correct format to begin with. And like we said, there are several, and I will show you where you can find some reference for them. But once it knows that it has accepted it is accepting the correct format of the file, it would also ensure that to check, the file contains at least 20 written words. And by written words, we actually mean the words that the student has typed and not screenshots of words, and I will show you a difference of that in a moment. This is where the first point I mentioned, usually if you create an assignment that wants or only accepts Turnitin files that it can check similarity for, a student may submit a file that has more pictures, and I've seen this mainly for engineering courses, where particularly for architectural development. I saw this 2 years ago where they were creating like pictures of houses and buildings and such, and they submit the pictures, but these pictures have written words on them. Those written words cannot be read by Turnitin because they're part of the picture, so they're seen as a picture and not as a written word, so the file wouldn't submit. And I'll show you like ways around that usually are done to resolve it. And then the other way is that it can access publicly available content. And this may be online materials or those that are in its own database. At the moment, Turnitin has 3 specific databases. I believe the one is the student repository, then there is the standard repository, and there's an institutional repository. But all 3 are used to store content. And these would be the same that are accessible to all other institutions across the world that use Turnitin as well. So any of them where a student has submitted a piece of work to an assignment, that assignment is now accessible to Turnitin. So when it's checking for similarity, it will not only check your own institutional database that you have where your students are submitting, but also the ones that all other institutions are submitting to, as long as it's what Turnitin has access to. And of course, the online publicly available materials, this may be like online journals, online books, articles, whatever it is that's publicly available, it can access that as well. And then it can provide the evidence of, again, academic misconduct, but in most cases, not all. And when we say not all, it's usually that if part of the content that the student has submitted is from a source that Turnitin does not have access to, something physical, for example, like a physical book that's not available online, then it won't be able to source that. But if it's the other content that has been uploaded somewhere online where Turnitin has access, then it will show that this has been sourced from certain document submitted at a certain location or available on a certain website. And when you see that, and you see from the original document of the student that there isn't a citation or reference for that, then you would know that they're probably doing something. It may not always be the case, and we'll discuss that in the next point. So what it cannot do. Obviously, it cannot match any content that it does not have access to. This may be files or systems of other companies. For example, Blackboard has their own system called the SafeAssign that you can use to create a Blackboard assignment, and using SafeAssign, it will generate its own similarity report. So any content submitted to a Blackboard submission for a Blackboard assignment, that goes to Blackboard. In most cases, Turnitin does not have access to it. So in such a case, then it won't be able to check similarity. It may also be physical sources like books and libraries, or books you have access to physically that are not available online. Then it cannot check similarity for that. As well, when any content may have been bought, for companies that do that, they may be using ways that Turnitin cannot check whether that content is available online. My apologies, I keep pressing on my mouse. If the essay has been bought from somewhere, and wherever it is that it has been bought, materials sourced from there aren't accessible to Turnitin, then it won't be able to check that. And in other cases, it may also not be able to check whether the student may have, plagiarized their own work. And this is if they've submitted into a different institution, particularly if it's a different company that Turnitin does not have access to, things like that. So there are several tips for when you're interpreting a similarity report that would be useful to know. These are also part of when you're reviewing the document itself, so they kind of go hand in hand. So the first of which is that you may see some differences in the type of content that the student has shared, and that may be the layout structure of their document or the fonts that they're using. If you see there's a difference of fonts here and there, one size is bigger than the other and they're all on the same line. If you see different spacing on the content, if you see different font types, that way it may tell you that they probably have sourced this content from different locations. But that's also something to note, that it's not always the case that they've done that maybe differently, or they've done it just to try to trick the system. It may be that they didn't know how to edit the material. Now, it's always useful to inform students that there are sources and resources available, particularly with LinkedIn Learning, where they can look at some materials where they can assist them to prepare content that's good, one that follows the structure that we want, and that's usually the Harvard referencing for when you're referencing the content, but also something related to preparing a good document. So the formatting of the document, ensuring that they're using a coherent font, same size, same spacing, ensure that everything looks nice. So if and when you have informed them to do that, given them the right support, and they have followed up, but still submit something that doesn't match, then yes, there may be a case that they have done misconduct. But if they weren't aware before, then it may be good to inform them before they get to that point. In other cases, you may find that the document contains two different forms of English, either English, the British version, and or the American version. That way it may tell you that they have copied some content from elsewhere, different sources that they're trying to include in their material. Again, the incoherent structure. You may see in some cases that there are presence of hyperlinks within their document. These would normally be if something has been copied from an online journal or an online article or an online book, an online website, and they'd usually automatically have links embedded within them. And if they just copy that and include in their document without obviously correct formatting, paraphrasing, and more, then you would notice such things. And that way you can tell if they have done anything weird that they're trying to trick the system. Referencing information that is not present in their actual document. You may see sometimes that they're commenting on things within the document, but when you review the entire document, whatever material that they're trying to comment isn't included. Some cases, it may very well be that they have forgotten, but to forget, say, 10 of these would be a very big red flag. If they forget one or two, in most cases, it may be fine, all humans. But if you see that there's a pattern, a lot more of this, that they're actually, referencing that isn't there, then they probably copied that material elsewhere, and they obviously forgot to include everything. Again, that way, they're trying to trick the system. Compared to a student who has been introduced to a new subject, and if you see that they're using very high professional terminology, then probably they've copied that content elsewhere. You may see a large chunk of content that has been flagged or has been highlighted or matched in the similarity text. When you view the report, you would see, say, a huge paragraph that has been copied. In some cases, some students may be a bit tech savvy or a bit clever, and they change one or two words. But if you see long lines and just a few words changed, then you can tell that probably something is happening here, that they're just trying to trick the system by changing a few things and submitting that as their submission. But probably that material may have been copied from elsewhere. If it's a current issue or current subject matter, and the student is using very old similarity, references, it may also be that they've copied that content from elsewhere. It may be that a similar research may have been done a couple of years ago using old sources, and they've just tried to use that to submit as part of the assignment. And if you notice that, then again, they're probably trying to trick the system. You may see that the content of their document is very well and correctly referenced throughout, but there isn't much of original text or writing from the student themselves. Usually, when they're supposed to create a submission, they obviously have to find sources somewhere, particularly if it's an assignment of that nature. And when they do this, they obviously have to have their own reflection of that content, their own personal discussions, and looking at comparing several sources. But if none of these are available, it's just that the content has been correctly referenced and everything is in there, but the reflection and their own original writing, then again, that may also be a red flag. It's something to note that it possibly may be that that file has been copied from somewhere or has been bought from somewhere or whatever else, but it may be that they're trying to trick the system. So with that being mentioned, I'll try and show you a practical activity. I haven't added it on this part yet, but what I will do is I will show you now some of the points that we've discussed. But before I submit these files to you or the slides to you after the end of the session, I will include annotated screenshots to include that information. So you have this on here as reference as well. But after we complete this, then we'll move on to point 6. But before we get to that, let's look at the practical activity itself. So I went ahead and created a test assignment that I called generating a research question. And I've already made a submission, and as you can see, it has extremely high similarity. One important thing to note is that there is no magic number of what amount of similarity is usually accepted. The reason being is that it may not always be the case that the high similarity is related to the marked content of the assignment. And when I say marked content, I mean the actual content that they have submitted. In most cases, particularly with me personally, I usually create most of my assignments using the same template. So that same template, because it would have same format and same wording in some areas, it would show up as similarity in the report. But obviously that's not part of the marked content. So it would increase the similarity report or the similarity score, but it's not something to worry about. In other cases, it may be the type of assignment or type of submission involved. If it's something more reflective, then you would not normally find a lot of percent or similarity because it's about them. They just talk about their own personal reflection. But if it's something particularly with literature reviews, because here they have to find lots of sources available and they have to reference that in their content and discuss them, you would normally find that it has higher similarity. So depending on the type of submission, it may not always be the case that higher similarity means they've copied. No, it simply means that depending on the type of submission, you would normally find that they have more of this than the other. So that being mentioned, I'm going to show you first how to create a new assignment, looking at all of the settings, and then we'll come back to this one and review that similarity. So here I'm working on a module that follows the Blackboard baseline template. And like I said, the baseline template is this template here with these different links. All of the modules you have would have at least these links available. And then from there, you can add your own as you see fit. Usually, we have our submissions created in the assessments area. From there, you'd come to assessments and select the type of assessment you're looking for. This one here for assignment is the Blackboard assignment. And like I hinted earlier, they too have their own similarity checker called SafeAssign. And using this, you are able to create it for that. And that way, any submissions made now and previously, similar to Turnitin, would generate their own similarity score. For a Turnitin assignment, simply select Turnitin assignment there. And here you can start adding the type of assignment you're looking for. In most cases, for what we use at UWL, it's mainly the paper assignment, so you can leave that as a default and just proceed to next step. This will redirect you to a form where you would now insert these as your required settings. the settings that we said have to be included, with the exception of the point value, which is clearly marked as optional. So here, I'll give it a name. I'll just say test assignment for CPD training, something like that. I may want to give it a point, say I'm marking this out of 100. The start date, like we said, this would be the default time for when you started to create the assignment. Now today's the 2nd of December and it's at 11:51 when we started to create this, so it will make that the default automatically. If we were to change this and say it should only start tomorrow, the assignment will be created, but it will not be available to students to start to submit their content. Because like we said, this is what it will control their access to the assignment and start to submit to it. So I'll leave that for tomorrow for now so we can see what it looks like after, and then we can make the necessary changes and then move on from there. The due date is for when, or the latest date for when they have to submit their assignment. So it usually just creates a default, which is the next week. But in our case, let me just say, let's say 23rd of December. The post date would be the date when the grades would be released to students. Now, this is very important because there's an optional setting, which we'll look at in a moment, that is related to this date. And that basically asks you that, would you like to release the grades to students before the post date? And like I hinted at the very beginning, this is obviously not recommended because the way we do marking at UWL, it's usually that after submissions are made and after the due date, the lecturer would have 15 working days, so that's 3 weeks, to give feedback. And within that time, there may be their own marking, another colleague as a second marker, and in some cases an external examiner as well to confirm before the grade is released to the student. Now, if you release the grade before this date, depending on the setting that we will see in a moment, any changes to the grade will be visible to students, and eventually it may create a lot of confusion and such. So always keep in mind that this is quite important, and you can set it in such a way that any changes you make, they will not see until such time that this date has been passed. So from here, I will release these, let's say in January, if I can get to it, there we go, maybe end of January. And then this one is about the similarity. Now remember I said there are two types of submissions, the first of which is that Turnitin will accept only the documents with which it can check similarity, and the other is the one that can accept any file type. And if you select this, it will show you that any file that it can accept, it will accept, but it will not be able to generate a similarity report. So because we want similarity, I will select that one and proceed to the optional settings. Here, you can give a description. We recommend you do this, usually just to tell the student anything that they need to know about the assignment. It's not required, of course, but recommended. If you want to allow submissions after the due date, like I previously said, when this is set to yes, after the due date, the student will still be able to submit their assignment, but it will be clearly marked as late. That way, you will see any and all students who submitted their assignments after the fact, and with that, you can mark them accordingly. Usually, you would be marking them down because of the late submission. Otherwise, if they have a valid reason, like mitigations and such, of which you know about, then again, you can mark them accordingly with that as well. If you set this to no, then after the due date, no one will be able to submit. So any late submitters, you would have to create a new assignment for them and call something like resets and such, which is usually the template format. When you look in the assessments area, you will see that there's usually a resets folder somewhere in there. The similarity report, these settings here are related to this option at the top. Now we're saying that we want to generate the similarity report. So we'd say yes. The similarity reports will be generated every time, and it will overwrite any new reports until the due date. This is recommended and it's set as default because every time a student creates a new document and they submit that, it will generate a new similarity as long as it's not the due date. And they can keep doing this up until the due date. If, for example, it has set on due date, it means only on the due date would their latest submission be generated similarity for. And obviously that's not, it's not a good way, because if by that time they find that they have high similarity, it will create a problem for them, particularly for you when you're marking them. So it's always recommended to use the second option. The first one would be the first report that has been submitted, and the first report for similarity that has been generated is the final one. So even if they will be able to submit later, which I don't expect, a new similarity will not be created. So obviously that too is not recommended. So just leave it at this point and then move on. Otherwise, if it's not, then set it to the second option and then move on. These three options, you can change this after the fact. And by that, I mean, you can change them within the assignment after students have submitted, a time during which you would be marking. So you don't have to worry about them just yet. But they're here just to help you, if you want to, exclude any bibliography from the index of your similarity, any quoted materials, again, to be excluded, and you want to exclude any small sources. I will show you how to change this within the assignment itself. Of course, we want to allow students to say similarity scores. So that way you would set that to yes. This option is the one that's related to the post date up here and also related to revealing the grades to students. That's why it said reveal grades to students only on post date. When set to yes, what that means is any changes to their grade that will be done during the marking period before the post date, the student will not be able to see that. After everything has been done and on the post date and later, then they will be able to see the final grade that you've assigned them, which is what's recommended. Enabling anonymous marking will simply hide the name of the student. This is particularly used in the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Healthcare, but in other cases, if you may so wish to use it, then you can. The only thing to note, however, is that if you mark this as yes, it will set the assignment to only accept submissions and make those submissions anonymous. However, you will not have the option to come back and change them for all the assignments. You will have to do this manually for every single assignment. Now, for the template I showed you, the first assignment I created, I made that anonymous, and I will show you the setting and how it looks like. As we said, there are several repositories or several databases to which Turnitin submits their papers. If you open this, you will see the three that I mentioned earlier: the standard paper repository, which is there, the default option; the institution paper repository, which is usually related to the institution with which you're related to, in this case UWL, and of course providing the choice to the student to select one of these two. What it basically means is that the standard will just be the standard, the main open one, where usually all submissions are set. The institution will just be specific within your institution, but it will still be available when Turnitin is checking for the similarity. And when the student has the choice, then if you select this, they can select which of these two to submit to. There is this last option here that says no repository. Now this one here is an interesting one to note because it basically controls whether a submission is saved. Now in most cases, I've identified in the last couple of years that a lecturer may want to create a submission where students would submit a document that is there just for draft, just for them to look at similarity, not the final submission. Because like we said, if you set it to these two and they submit the first document, it generates a similarity report. If you had this option here set for immediately to override, they can submit a new copy and a new similarity is generated. But that previous submission and the new one, they're still saved in the Turnitin repository. So if they come to submit a third one, it will continue affecting the similarity. However, in this option, if you create two assignments, for example, one called the draft or only similarity, and set it to no repository, any submissions they make in there will not be saved. They will be accepted, but they will not be saved in Turnitin, which means when they come to make their final submission in another link or in another assignment, it will not pick up their previous submissions in the draft document to check for similarity. Is that understood, or are there any questions?
No, that's quite useful, actually.
Excellent.
Understood. Thank you.
Perfect. These options here are the options where Turnitin will check and search for the content to match and generate the similarity. If you want to deselect this, so if I remove these two, it will only check the first two, and obviously it may not find a lot of content because maybe the student looked at more of these options. So it's recommended to leave all of them to ensure that it checks everywhere it has access to in order to generate something that's, nice and precise. Now, I mentioned that I would hint something about online grading using rubrics and grading forms. This is where you would attach them. Here I have 3 templates: the standard rubric template, a custom rubric template, and a non-numeric one. All of these 3 are available on the Teaching Hub. And if you allow me 2 minutes, I can show you where they are. If you come to Learning Technology, Turnitin, and then Marking and Feedback, and then Rubrics and Grading Forms, you will be redirected here. This first video is to show you how you can export a rubric and send it to a colleague so they too can import it on their own account so they can use it in their assignments for marking. You should know that any rubric you create is only available to you in your account. It's not available to anyone else. So this is the way to share them: to export it, give it to someone, they import it, then they can use it. Then down here, there are 3 videos: Best Practices for Effective Rubric Design by Turnitin, and then How to Use Rubrics and Grading Forms Part 1 and 2, also by Turnitin. Lastly, these are the links to the 3 templates available. They are downloaded with an RBC file extension, which is the rubric file extension. As it says, you must have a AWL account to use these links. Otherwise, if it's for partner institutions who do not have UWL accounts, they can use this link, which is available to anyone, even yourselves if you want to. So if I try this one now and click on it, it will show you the 3 files you can download, and following the first video I showed, you can import that into your account and use it for marking. So with that mentioned, all of that guidance would be available to allow you to learn how to use this form manager to create the rubric, attach it to your assignment, like in this example. This would be the rubric used because it's the one I've selected. If I change this and select a custom rubric, then that would be the one used. But now say I'm happy with all of the settings, I then proceed to create my assignment. And then there we go. When I receive this message, I know it's done. And here's my assignment. Now to go to the first one, we said when you want to view the submissions from students, you would go to the course management area, course tools, and Turnitin assignments. If you have more than one, or even if you have just the one assignment, you'd have to select it in order to see what the submissions are. So if I open this one, this area is what's referred to as the Turnitin's assignment inbox. And this is where you would see a list of all the students you have and the submissions made. Now, earlier, we mentioned something about anonymous marking, we said there is no option to disable this once it has been created and at least one student has submitted. If I go to the edit assignment, you will see that that option in option settings has been grayed out, just like that. So I cannot change this. The alternative would be to click on the box, provide any reason. I can just type whatever, it doesn't really matter, and just submit. And now it will reveal the name of the student. So going into the similarity, I'll try and cover this up until 12:15, and then we can have a 5 minutes break and come back at 12:20 and finish for the last 10 minutes, if that's okay. Otherwise, I could just cover the entire session if no break is needed. Is that okay?
I'm trying to just keep going, given might be more.
All right.
Towards
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's
Excellent.
better to keep going in. I think it's perfectly smoothly going ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So we said you come here, you see the name of the student, the titles, you see the similarity and additional information. Clicking on any one of these three options, either grade, similarity, or title, would open the submission in what's known as the feedback studio. And that's the space for Turnitin where you can do your marking. You can see the submission, which is this. So that's what the student has submitted. And so far, I'm sure you've probably seen several red flags, like we mentioned earlier. The first thing we said, there may not be a coherent structure. We said we may see that there is a difference in font, like this is bold, this is not bold, this is a smaller text, this is large, and also the font itself is different. Similarly here as well. So things like this, the first hints that would let you know, and this is as well a different font type, different spacing. These would be the first hints to let you know that a student may have done misconduct, may have copied something from somewhere. But like we said, it may not always be the case. It may simply be that they don't know how to do editing and such. So identifying several good courses, particularly those available on LinkedIn Learning, and directing the students to look at them, it would give them the knowledge that they need so that they can create something better in future. But let's assume this student was trying to trick us in some way. So they've submitted this document, and now I want to review the similarity. To the right side here, you will see 4 boxes of options. The first is a single icon. The second, the blue one, there are 3 icons. And then there's the red section with several more. And lastly, 2 more at the end. The ones for similarity are these red ones. But at the top, the black one has the option to allow you to view a layer. The layer basically means the content, what you will see on that document. So if I select similarity as well, it will highlight any of the areas that are part of the similarity that have been found somewhere. In this similarity box, the first one is the flag. A flag is basically something that has been identified by Turnitin that's probably done by a student, whether it's deliberately in most cases to try and trick the system. It may be that they've hidden quotations, because usually you have the option to exclude quotations in similarity. So they may put quotation around content and hide the quotations in white text, so they're not easily visible by the naked eye. But Turnitin may usually find that. And if it does, it may flag it here. In other cases, you may see that Turnitin has identified that there may be hidden text as part of the content, and that will too be highlighted. In this case, no flags have been found, which is good. But there's still the problem with the 83% of similarity. So if you select that, you will see the sources from which Turnitin has identified this document has been found. Now, as you can see, we said earlier that in some cases you may see a big chunk of content like this that has been found as a matching text from somewhere, particularly in this paragraph. Both paragraphs were copied entirely, or at least to some point, a huge chunk of them from some document somewhere. Now, to identify where this was from, you'll clearly see that they're highlighted by a certain color and they have a number, and that's relevant to what we have here. Now, the first one, which is this one, reflects with this paragraph. So if I select it, it will show me a document where this was submitted to, and I can see it was made within a submission at UWL. If we select that option, it will redirect us to a place where we can view the original document where that particular submission was found. Now, I copied this from my previous submission from the project module, and if I view the similarity and just scroll down here and this paragraph, so you see that this entire paragraph and this one to the end are the ones that I copied. So I copied these and I used them in this submission and they were found. To also find them in more detail, you can select this icon, which will review the entire document in this area and it will show you clearly. Now, earlier before, I also hinted that in some cases you may see a huge paragraph highlighted and only a few words in the middle have been changed. If you view this one, the words in black have not been identified, so the ones in red have. If I scroll slightly down, I hope you can see this text here where it says final year project in order to. That text in order has been changed or has been removed and only 2 has been left. So this first paragraph, they've changed just those 2 words. And when I scroll down further, I will also see the same thing on the second paragraph. And there's also a word here that says students' developments are tested. So that are is also changed. But you may find severe cases where a paragraph like this has a few lines or maybe a few words have been changed, a few words here, a few words there. That's another red flag to let you know that someone has done something. If I go back, you'll see that there may be another source. Now this shows an internal source, and here you can see that it has highlighted these lines showing where this material was found. When you open that option like we did before, you can click and it will review wherever it is that it has found it, and it will show you what that content is. Let's say you have submitted something, or a student has submitted something, and you want to recalculate the similarity after the fact. To do that, you have the option to exclude sources. Now, this can be done in 2 ways. The first is here, but on this, you can exclude them by a certain type or a certain group. So let's say this group, select the arrow. It will show you additional links available. And then you can select this to exclude them. When you select the option down to exclude, you can select however many of them you want. So let's say I select a couple like that. I'm now excluding 10 of these sources. The moment I do that, it will regenerate a new similarity. Now it's at 30%. But once I've excluded, say I want to bring them back, how would I do that? That's available on the 4th option, the filters and settings. No, sorry, the 5th option, the 0 and the basically the no entry sign. These are all the sources that we just excluded, but we want to bring back. You can either select a few and restore just those, and those will regenerate a new similarity. So if I refresh that, if those 2 are significant, the similarity should change, but it doesn't appear they were. I can also select everything and restore that. And if I refresh, it will bring back the original that we saw, 83%. Now this option here is the other option to show you all of these sources, but in one full list. So everything, instead of matching them per group. And like we did before, you can just select exclude sources and select them and then exclude to recalculate the similarity. Now there were those 3 options. in the optional settings that we talked about, which were the excluding, whether it's the bibliography or the small sources or something else, they're available at this filter icon. When you come here, you have those options. So before, when you're creating the assignment, you had the option to say yes or no. And that's basically the checkbox. When checked, it's a yes. When not checked, it's a no. If I check this as well, and then apply changes, it will recalculate the similarity and show me something different if it will find anything different. I would have the option to exclude small sources if I want to. So if I say exclude small words, maybe 3 words, for example, I can apply that as well. And then again, in case if it has identified any changes after the ones I've made, it will recalculate and show me a new similarity. So that way you are able to view the content from the student, and using the first guides we talked about, where we look at the format, the layout, the type of content, the structure, and more, those would be the first hints to let you know whether a student has done any academic misconduct, and that way you can mark them accordingly. And then the second is using the similarity report from the flag, if it has identified any flags, from the similarity score, from any and all sources found, selecting an option to view the original source. One thing I should clarify before I continue is that when you click on this link to review a document, as we did here, this opened up without a problem because the document is submitted to an institution that we are a part of. If it was submitted to another institution, Turnitin would send an email to the lecturer of that module, informing them that someone at University of West London is requesting to see a document that a student in their institution has submitted for a module and assignment that that lecturer is leading. Sometimes some of you may probably have received similar emails from Turnitin asking this request. It's not a problem. It's your choice. You may choose to accept or reject it, but it doesn't change anything. It's simply another lecturer from a different institution requesting to see a document because it's found as a similarity to a submission made by that institution's student. So I hope all of that made sense. And lastly, we said after you review this, you're able to see the source where it was found. You can click on that or this to view the content itself. It will show you the paragraph or the content that has been copied, anything that has been changed, and that way you can make your own judgments to do your marking and mark them accordingly. And when we go back, we can see that we have the option from the all sources. We can exclude sources, select any and all sources we want. Once we exclude, this will generate a new similarity if changes were found. Otherwise, you have the filter option, and from here you can filter quotations or the bibliography or remove those, and then to recalculate, and again it will generate a new number if any changes have been found, in this case from 83 to 88. And then any of the sources excluded previously can be found here, where you can choose to put them back in or restore all, and again a new similarity score would be generated. So that's everything that I wanted to discuss with regards to interpreting Turnitin similarity reports, creating assignments, academic misconduct, and more. Is there any questions so far?
Not from me, all good, thank you.
Excellent. All right. So since there are no questions,
Very, very, very incisive.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you. All right, since there are no questions, then just go back to the slides here and talk about what advice you should be giving to your students. So the first is that you should give them a guide on how much work that they should be quoting as part of their submission. Thank you. Giving them a guide of how much work they should be quoting, that way they will try to target that particular quotation required, so they don't either go over or below that, so they're within the range that you have accepted or you have identified as one that would be accepted. Explain to them any penalties for not referencing correctly or for plagiarism. Like previously discussed, Meenakshi said within her cohort, they're teaching their students, showing them, talking to them about academic misconduct, and obviously that would usually have information about penalties. Maybe they'll be marked at 0, or they may be, I don't know, expelled if it's something too much, whatever that may be. When a student understands the consequences of what would happen if they do something like this, then that would be maybe a deterrent for them not to do it. Provide them sufficient guidelines and remind them during appropriate times. So like I initially explained, following Thomas's question, what we have done, particularly in these recent years, not from when I started, is that from the beginning, before the student is due to start their module, like with the inductions, we did this around 3 weeks before the start of the semester. Now, within that time, we talked to them about the different services available, issues that they may experience, where to find support and more. But particularly with academic misconduct and content and such, we talk to them via the school or subject librarians, explaining to them that we have support offered by the subject librarians. We talk to them about where they can find content, particularly with the library website, both online and maybe booking or requesting books from other institutions for interlibrary loans, or the physical books that we have within the library. We talked to them about all of these things. And of course, we showed them examples of how they can correctly cite their content, correctly write stuff using the student support guides and student support teams for the engagement that we have available. So that way, we have informed them at that time and reminding them during sufficient or appropriate times. That would be times like now, for when we are due to submit in the next 3 weeks or so. It is highly recommended that you would arrange with your school librarians to come in and speak to your students, to talk to them about this, to explain once again, or again, provide any additional support required, what it is that's related to plagiarism, how they cannot do plagiarism, any penalties associated, and of course, what sources and how to find those sources, and what's regarded as academic source, not something like Wikipedia. To use it to start finding your research, fine, but to reference it in your content, obviously not. So things like this. And then the fourth point, again, talking about bringing in subject librarians to talk to them, particularly with the type of referencing format that we accept. Usually that's the Harvard referencing. So we show them what this is, what it looks like, and the different ways to source it, the information of which is available in the Cite Them Right online website. They can join that with a student account. And if I just show you an example of that, in case we have any colleagues that may need it, if I go to login, so that's Cite Them Right. It's available on the university website, but because I opened it previously, it's already there available for me. Spell, bear with me. There we go. This will redirect me to a login page where you would log in with just your username and your associated password, just like how you'd access LinkedIn Learning. And Campus Press. Unlike Blackboard or email or timetabling or Portal, where you do your student email or your staff email and its associated password. So from here, it shows them the basics. It shows them books, how to reference them. It shows them how to reference journals. And here, because we use Harvard referencing, it's selected there by default. Let's say I wanted to reference a book. I can say I want to reference a printed book, And this will give me some examples of what type of font I'm looking for. Maybe I'm looking for a book with 4 authors or more. And here it will show me an example of what the in-text citation would look like, what the reference would look like. And of course, this is what I can write following this template. I can edit this to say something like that. And so on and so forth. And then when I'm done, I can simply copy this and put it in my content, within my document, something that I've cited as per these examples. Or of course, I can email it to myself and more. So those ways you'd have identified, you'd have told your students, you'd have reminded them, you'd have given them additional support. After that, there would obviously be no reason for them to obviously do something different from what's expected. So that being said, that's the very end of the session. In case any support is required from us, those are our team contact information. Down here, I will add a few more links, the first of which is your school subject librarians. I found that link fairly straightforward, just going to Google and searching UWL subject librarians, or just go to the university website and do the same. You will find this. And then again, academic support team would be these people for the relevant schools that they support. And from here, you can contact them directly. Alternatively, they should be within the documents of your module study guide. So inform students to look at those to find that information. And then we already looked at this item right and just searching for that as well. So we'll add these 2 links here as well. And the rest is just general guidance for support, guidance for staff on learning technology, the one for Turnitin specific, for students as well, the teaching hub, our contact information, and that's everything. Before you go, just 2 last activities, the first of which is your feedback of how you found this session. It would be at the very first link that we used, and that was at Paul Ev, as seen at the top, paulev.com/technologist. If you visit this again, it should still give you the option to select one of these images of how you found the session. And then lastly, before you go, I'll come back to that comment in a moment. Before you go, I will put in an activity, which is another feedback for the CPD training. Please do take the opportunity to complete this. Let me just remove any styling and share this in. Thank you, Fawad. Please do visit this and complete that training, or sorry, that feedback. The only thing that's required is selecting what's relevant. It's completely anonymous. Be as critical, as constructive as you need to be, following the content of the session, whether it's activities, whether it's the feedback, the duration, anything else, stuff that I would use to make these sessions better for future. That would be highly appreciated. Other than that, I would welcome any questions before we go, but this is pretty much the end of the session. Thanks for attending, and I hope you learned something.
Very well, very well.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. So since there are no questions, I will leave you to continue completing this. If you can do it in the next minute or so, that will be perfect. And I will stop sharing my screen, stop the